Before Activision decided to use the name Call of Duty Modern Warfare, the exact same name for two different titles about 12 years apart, EA did it first when they had Most Wanted in 2005 and then Need for Speed Most Wanted 2012, which I will add is a Criterion game because they added that to the title as a way to differentiate it. But Need for Speed Most Wanted 2012 is a game that is unanimously seemingly hated because it's not Need for Speed Most Wanted 2005. In fact, it shares very little in resemblance to the 2005 game outside of just simply its name, and it's something that even GameStop's website seems to confuse when ordering the product. The 2012 iteration of Need for Speed Most Wanted released on the Xbox 360, PlayStation 3, as well as a little bit of two oddball consoles, the Wii U and the PlayStation Vita. I've primarily played this game on the PlayStation Vita, though I do own the Xbox 360 version as well, because it is a relatively inexpensive game to buy for both platforms in comparison to the other titles on the platforms. Usually every Vita game is a little more expensive than its, 360 or PS3 counterpart, and that's to be expected here, but it is one of the better racing games on the Vita and the Wii U. In fact, the Wii U is kind of the definitive version of this game. While Need for Speed Most Wanted 2005 seems to be held up in the community as the top tier Need for Speed game when looking back, and maybe some of that is nostalgia, one of the biggest selling points with the 2005 iteration of Most Wanted was the fact that it had a storyline with these kind of sort of live action green screened cutscenes that people actually really liked at the time. And while it does look quite dated today, the story here was something that people were interested in, much more than I can say about something like Need for Speed Payback or Heat, these more recent titles where the story is just very skippable, and people oftentimes say things to the likes of they'd rather see a racing game with no story in, and they did that with Most Wanted 2012, but people hated it. There's absolutely no resemblance of a story in Most Wanted 2012, and that's not really a problem for me. Instead, what most people also point out is the lack of progression in this game. You're not really saving up money to buy another car because every car is just simply found in the open world. All of them are just scattered around the map to be found in the same way that the more recent Need for Speed games will have billboards and things like that to drive through, different sort of collectibles to find in the world, almost like a 1990s 3D platformer. And while those billboards are still in Most Wanted 2012, it's the idea of driving around, finding other cars that really makes the game be appealing in its own right. And I say that because on its own, Need for Speed 2012 is a game that kind of is its own thing, and that's okay. Not every Need for Speed game after it took on this formula, and as just kind of a one-off title, I can see how it's actually quite appealing. It kind of breaks up, if you're playing a bunch of different Need for Speed titles, it kind of breaks it up by being something totally new, and coming off of Hot Pursuit 2010, which was a little bit more of a level-based game because it didn't have an open world in the sense that the open world had anything to actually do in it. Instead, the open world was very empty, and some of those assets were actually reused in Most Wanted 2012. And while the level-based system of 2010's Hot Pursuit didn't really give it a storyline either, it had a sense of progression that people wanted to see in a Need for Speed game, and 2012's Most Wanted just simply did not. So what we got in Most Wanted 2012 feels a lot like what people just want out of a Forza Horizon game these days. They want to be thrown into a big open world, and they want to have the ability to just kind of do everything right off the bat without being tied down to some sort of cutscenes that they don't really care about. And Most Wanted 2012 actually delivered that, but it's the overall lack of customization on each vehicle and just kind of the cheesy, overly easy way of just simply finding the vehicle that I think made the sense of progression here be lacking. Maybe if it had been something like Need for Speed Payback, where you found parts to assemble an entire vehicle, then maybe it would have felt a little bit more rewarding to actually unlock the vehicle than simply just driving up next to it like you do here. And once you find a vehicle, it gets added to your vehicle list, and from there you can swap between the vehicle kind of on the fly using the easy drive. And each vehicle comes with 3, 4, it depends on the vehicle, how many different races or events it's allowed to take place in that allow you to unlock additional stuff for the vehicle. And that's where you get into the little bit of customization you see here, like swapping out spoilers, nitrous, and a few other things. It's a very minor amount of customization compared to what you saw in both older and newer Need for Speed titles that came after this. In this way, Most Wanted 2012 really feels like an arcadey game, not in the sense that the driving is arcadey, because that's the case for every Need for Speed game, kind of with the exception of Need for Speed Shift, which also came out around this time, but it's very arcadey in the sense that it's a pick up and play, you're constantly getting new stuff, and it's something that maybe would have really appealed to somebody who just needed a quick sense of dopamine to keep them playing, and this game delivered that by constantly having you swap through new vehicles. And I also want to mention the fact that this is reminiscent of another game from this era. I think it's reminiscent of Burnout Paradise, another game that was very open, just like this, came out a few years prior, and ironically was developed by the same developers in Criterion Games. I would consider Most Wanted 2012 to be more of a follow-up to Burnout Paradise than being a Need for Speed game at all. I really think the Metacritic score of this game, in retrospect, could have been lifted by just calling it something other than, verbatim, Need for Speed Most Wanted, because it set an entirely unachievable precedent, and the game didn't even attempt to live up to it or even resemble that 2005 title. The only overlapping point between 2005 and 2012's Most Wanted is the existence of the Most Wanted list, where in the 2012 game you're trying to earn XP to essentially level up to a high enough level to be able to challenge the top 10 Most Wanted cars. You beat that car, you unlock that car, and these are the only 10 cars that you actually have to unlock through gameplay and not just via driving up to them and simply finding them, again, in a sort of 3D platformer sense. And while that discovering of the vehicles and just hunting them out in the world was something that was frowned upon at the time, I think that it actually has aged relatively well. And again, as a one-off title, this wasn't the way the Need for Speed franchise changed going forward. I think it's a fun thing to kind of break up the monotony of just grinding a whole bunch of events to slowly move through a storyline that isn't really enjoyable like you could find yourself doing in some of the newer titles. The lack of customization here is disappointing. I wish there would be tons more items and just more cars, I suppose, in general, though they would have, again, had to have scattered them throughout the world, which probably would have been a pain to do on a map of this size, and thus they would have had to increase the map size, and they were already reusing assets from Hot Pursuit 2010 to make this. I just think that this game could have received a different title. It could have been a Burnout game when you look at some of these crash cameras, and I think that had they have done that, the game may have been received a little bit better. I do think it is worth revisiting the game today. It is not backwards compatible for the Xbox One. However, you can play it on a 360, a PlayStation 3, a Wii U, or a PlayStation Vita, and if you own one of those consoles, you can probably get your hands on it fairly cheap if you buy it at, say, a local game store, a garage sale, a pawn shop, something like that. But the 360 copy goes for like $15 to $20 on Amazon and eBay, which seems really expensive for what it is, and I was able to find a copy locally for like $3. So I wouldn't recommend buying this one online because it is very widely available if you just take a look in your local area. Thank you guys for watching. I'm Bailey, and I will see you in the next video.